Hello, and welcome to the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast. This is John Goodwin, your host. This podcast is dedicated to the aspiring writer or artist and will provide inspiration and tips from top professionals in the field, along with contest winners and a few surprise guests. Today we are speaking with one of those surprise guests, Stephen Sears. Stephen Sears is an American writer and producer primarily working in television. He is perhaps best known for writing and co-executive producing the popular series Xena, Warrior Princess, as well as the subsequent creation Sheena, based on the comic book of the same name. You also did Swamp Thing and probably a bunch more that I'm not even saying, but anyway, that's amazing. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. I like that you introduced me as the surprise guest. So, surprise! It's Steve.
So we met each other. Was it through the Winter Twin? How did we meet each other? I'm just trying to remember that. It's been some time.
Well, it was a small bar in Calcutta. The room was dark. The music was waft. No, it was a combination of people, but notably Kevin J. Anderson.
Oh, Kevin Anderson. That's right. Yes.
Yeah, Kevin and I have known each other for 20-something years. We actually met at a convention where literally when they did the opening and all the guests, these special appearing people were on stage, we outnumbered the people in the audience. It was unfortunately a very badly run convention. But Kevin and Rebecca, his wife, we just hit it off and we remained friends. And obviously we're both, all three of us, very creative people interested in the literary arts, and friendship has grown. We've worked on projects together. But anyway, that's how we got to know each other, because Kevin was the first one to tell me about Writers of the Future, and that got me excited.
And we met at an awards ceremony. You were his guest, and we met you there at the awards ceremony, I think it was.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
That's where it was, yeah.
Because we were on the list, and someone said, "Who's Stephen Sears?" And we looked you up, and oh my golly. Oh my golly. So it's been a great friendship since then, too. So it's very, very good that we got to know you. Now, you obviously in the 80s and 90s were very well known with a lot of your projects, but how'd you get into television screenwriting? Because I think it's a very fascinating story, how you went from being a high school dropout and going to Calcutta to actually...
Oh, you're using them against me. Okay, great. Yes, it was a long, arduous road. I will try to give the shortened version of this.
Well, all right.
Anybody who has heard me talk, I do tend to be a bit verbose. Well, first thing is that to understand myself and where I'm coming from, I'm a military brat. So my dad was in the service for 23 years, and every 3 years we moved to a different location. When he retired, we retired to a small town in St. Augustine, Florida. That was what I now call my hometown. And I was in junior high school at the time. And what happened then is I got interested in acting. There was a local play, a seasonal play called Cross and Sword, which was the story of the founding of Florida. And so I decided to audition. I got the role. I was like 12 or 13 years old. And from that point on, I just was fascinated with the theater and performance and entertainment. So when I graduated high school, after doing all the high school plays, being the president of the drama club, doing regional theater, and I went to college, it was obvious. My major was definitely going to be medicine. That's true. When my dad had retired from the military, even though he was a frontline soldier, he went into hospital administration, and I liked science. And so I thought, oh, this is great. I will do that because, I want to make some money. Well, that worked out until Chemistry 101 knocked me into liberal arts because I got a C in chemistry, and you can't go pre-med with a C in chemistry. And so I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my future. And there was an event that happened at the time dealing with a movie that had come out. And the movie was called The Goodbye Girl, and Richard Dreyfuss starred in it. And people who had seen it, my friends, were saying, oh, he's playing you, you should go see it. So I went and saw it, and I saw a lot of similarities between the character. So he won an Academy Award for that role. And I remember, I was still at college. I didn't know what I wanted my major to be. And I remember thinking to myself, I was walking to the student union, and I thought to myself, of course he would win an award like that, but only special people win those things. And I literally stopped right in my tracks. And I thought to myself, oh my God, if he had felt that way, he never would have gotten near it. And that was the moment I decided, I'm going to follow my heart. I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to be an actor. That was my plan. I'm going to go transfer to a school, Florida State, which had a great theater department. And I also had to call my dad and tell him that I was going to be an actor and not a doctor. Now, a lot of people who have heard me talk about this have heard this story because it doesn't change. It is what happened. When I called my dad and told him, I said, I'm not going to be a doctor. I'm going to be an actor. My dad immediately said, well, you've always loved it, son. Go and do it. And so I did. So I got my degree in theater, and then I moved to Los Angeles and to pursue acting. I immediately got a job, what's called an entry-level job into the industry out here, working at a restaurant as a waiter. That's true. You know that. Now, while I was there, I met this guy named Bert Pearl, and he and I became best friends. Okay, so put Bert on the back burner just for a moment. So in the meantime, I'm taking acting classes, and I'm meeting casting directors who are at these classes. And I got to know them fairly well. My attitude is I'm more interested in you than I am in selling myself. So a lot of the barriers came down, and I became friendly with them. And one of the things I found out from them, just by listening to their talking about their jobs, was that they saw a lot of actors who came in and just did the same material for auditions. Their cold auditions were almost always something from a Neil Simon play, very popular at the time. And they were tired of it. They said, we can mouth the words along with them. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to start writing my own audition scenes. So I started writing these little 3-page, 3-minute audition scenes to be done in cold auditions. Now, there was a showcase that was coming up, and a partner, this woman and I, decided we were going to partner together and do one of my scenes at this showcase. Now, at a showcase, basically actors will pay to be a part of this showcase. There'll be like maybe 7 performances that night, and there's a audience that's invited of people in the industry. It's all for networking. So there's agents, there's casting directors, etc. You probably won't even meet all of the other people who are appearing on stage. You're just paying for the time. So for the night of the showcase, I showed up and I looked at the program bill, and 5 of the scenes being done out of 7 were ones I had written. What had happened is my scenes were being passed around at acting classes. People were enjoying them. So afterwards, one of the casting directors asked me if I had written those scenes, and I said yes. And she said, you should seriously think about writing. And my first reaction was, I can't do that. That's a lot of typing. I'm not a writer. What are writers? What creature is a writer? And so that night, just for the heck of it, I pulled out a script that I had, not that I'd written, but I'd acquired. And I went through it and very naively thought, oh, it's a whole bunch of little 3-page scenes, just kind of in order. So I thought, I'm going to write a script just for the fun of it. And I've said this many times, and I'm very proud of it. In 2 days, I wrote the worst script that has ever been written in the history of mankind. It was horrible. It really was. But I just so loved doing it. The characters were in my head. I could set everything up. I could play off jokes. I could play with people's emotions. I loved it, and I wanted to continue doing it. Now, back to Bert. So Bert and I, as best friends, we had a lot of common interests, and it turned out he also had an interest in scripts. And so he and I decided that just for the fun of it, we would start writing scripts. Now, I want to interject right here that at no point in this story have I said that I wanted to be a writer.
Right.
Because I didn't. I had no intention of being a writer. None whatsoever. Didn't even occur to me. But this was fun. So Bert and I started writing these scripts. These were little speculative scripts. We would see a television episode and write an episode of an existing series, but only for the fun of it. All right, so now a new series comes on the air. In 1983, was a series called Riptide, about 3 detectives who live on a boat. 2 of them hunky guys, one of them kind of a computer geek. And I watched the pilot, and I liked it. And I told Bert, I said, let's write that one for the fun of it. So one of the things I also did back then was I would call the production offices and ask them if they had writer's guides. Some offices, some shows have writer's guides. They're intended to be given out to freelance writers so they'll know how to write the show. Sometimes they don't have them. I would call up, and a few times they would hang up on me. Sometimes they would send me one. Most of the time they didn't. But what the heck? Why not try? So I called, and I got put through to this woman who worked in the Riptide offices, and I asked her if they had a writer's guide, and she said no. She goes, but have you seen the show? It was brand new. And I said, oh, I love the show. And she goes, oh, really? And then we just started talking. And most of what we talked about had nothing to do with the show. It's like, oh, I've been out here for a couple of years. Where are you from? From Florida. Oh, my gosh, my relatives live in Florida. We just were chatting. So at the end of this chat, she said, she goes, so you and your friend, have you written any scripts? And I said, oh, we've written a few for the fun of it. And she said, well, I know the producers of Riptide are always looking for writers. So if you have an agent, have them send them over. You never know. And I went, sure. And we got off the phone, and I did not get her name. She didn't get my name. I had no idea. This was just a pleasant conversation. So I called this guy I knew who was an agent, and I described the conversation. And he said, oh, sure, I'll send a couple over to you. I'll send a couple of scripts of yours over there. What the heck? So about 2 months later, I get a call from the story editor of Riptide, Tom Blomquist. And he said, why don't you just come in? We just want to meet you. And Bert and I were like, cool. Okay, this kind of sounds like fun. So Bert and I went over to see Tom, and he introduced us to the executive producer of the show, Babs Grayhowski. So we just chatted and talked and had a great time. These were two awesome people. Now, I am somebody who loves watching people who are passionate about something doing that something. That's how I learn. I learned to play golf by watching people who are passionate about golf. I didn't learn so much from books, although I really value the education that comes from books. I want to know what that feels like. It's a Zen thing. So here I am in a room, both Bert and I, in this room with two people who are passionate about storytelling and writing. We loved it. So Tom, at a certain point, said, have you guys even thought about Riptide episodes? And since Bert and I were going to write one, we said, oh, yeah, we had some ideas. And we laid out like 5 ideas. Two of them they weren't interested in. 3 of them they thought were interesting, and they said, why don't you come back in a couple of weeks and have those beaten out? And yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is the short version. So a couple of weeks later, Bert and I had come back with 2 of the stories kind of beaten out in a paragraph form, and then a brand new idea, because one of the 3 we couldn't figure out, but we came up with a third idea. And the third idea actually dealt with where did the boat come from that they lived with. So Babs and Tom liked that idea, and they said, why don't you guys write up an outline? Okay, fine. So we literally wrote up like a high school outline like you would do. Later on, we found out that was called a beat sheet. We didn't know it at the time. So we wrote that up, came back and met them. And now keep in mind, Bert and I still thought that the show must be on hiatus, and they just liked us. And we thought this is a great way for us to learn. So for about 45 minutes in that meeting, Tom and Babs took our outline and tore it apart and put it back together. And it was brilliant. And we loved watching it because it was just like, this is what they do. This is so awesome. So at the end of that meeting, Tom turned to me and he said, I need the name of your agent for business affairs. And I looked at him in shock, and I said, did we get an assignment? And he said, well, you guys got the assignment 2 weeks ago. And Bert and I were literally so shocked when we walked out. Bert turned to me and he said, are we getting paid for this? And I said, I think so. I think they pay writers. And he goes, how much? And I said, well, hopefully it's like $500 because, we got to split it. And at that time, for a 1-hour script, it was $15,000. So that became our first sale. But here's the thing. We wrote the first draft of that script as freelancers, turned it in to them. I got a call on Monday on my message machine, and I still have the cassette tape from that old message machine. Tom Blomquist called, and he said he read the script and really loved it. And he said, I know that the producers of Hardcastle and McCormick and the A-Team are looking for writers. We're going to give your names to them. And so 2 days later on Wednesday, Babs Grayhowski, the exec producer, called. And there's a funny story around how she called, because she called me and woke me up, and I wasn't even aware of what she was saying. But basically what she said was that she had given the script to the owner of the company, who was Stephen J. Cannell. And Steve Cannell, if you don't recognize the name, he co-created the A-Team. He co-created Rockford Files. I mean, he was the number one, arguably the number one. I'm sure Aaron Spelling would disagree. And Glenn Larson, I know, would definitely disagree. But in the 80s, he was like the boutique production company. It was like if you could get into there, it was like you went right to the top. So Steve had read the script, and Babs said, Steve only had one note in your entire script. So Tom and I were wondering if you guys want to come down here, get an office, and work with us full-time on our shows. Now, I haven't stopped working since. And that was in 1984.
Wow.
The most amazing thing to take out of that for people, I think, is that from the moment I wrote that extremely horrible script to the moment I was standing in my own writer's office was less than a year. From a standing start of not intending to be a writer. That's the closest to an overnight success you're going to hear in this business. But there's a lot more to it to learn from that. I had so many things that fell in my favor, and I had an incredible writing partner, my best friend at the time, and we had our own passion, and we matched the passions of the people we were talking to. We also didn't give them a reason to push us back, because most people do that. They're trying to sell themselves so much that people put up walls. I think what helped us the most is that everybody recognized that we truly, truly were storytellers who just loved the process and loved being creative and were not overtaken by our own egos or our own pride. But anyway, so that is the short version of how I broke in.
Wow, that's an amazing story. We've discussed it before, and I think it's just with the scope of what we are talking about here on this podcast. I think it's really important that people understand, other people's their curves that they went through. What was their arc from beginning to success? Or some people have experienced all types of various things, and the people have started and they quit and they start again.
Right.
So I think this is important, and also I think the biggest takeaway for me listening to you just now is you're all about this story, not about your ego.
Yes, that is, and that's an important thing. I told my wife recently. I said, if I ever have an autobiography, I'm going to. The title is going to be. Well, I didn't see that coming, because so much of my life has been like that. And I try to look back and say, really, what was the connective tissue? And what you just mentioned was a major part of it. Now, it's not that I don't have an ego. I have one. It's not that I don't have pride. I have a lot of pride, especially in my own work. But I don't feel the need to be offended by other people's talents or their abilities. I find other people to be fascinating. The more I learn from other people, the better a person I am and a better writer I am. Otherwise, some of my friends are major people in the industry, and I wouldn't have those people as friends if I had that attitude.
Right.
So the interesting thing about that first phone call that I made, I realized the reason that phone call was successful was because I didn't call up trying to sell myself. I called up because I wanted knowledge. I asked that woman, I want knowledge. Do you have a writer's guide? I want to learn. Mm-hmm. And there are so many people not just in my industry, but in so many other creative industries who honestly would love to think of themselves as being a mentor somehow to where they help somebody else. They want that nice feeling. And I realized my attitude invited that. And by the way, as I said, I didn't get that woman's name. It took me 20-something years before I figured out who that woman was, because I was kind of like, whoever that was, I'm going to thank her. I'm going to buy her a car. Turned out her name was Kendall, and she ended up being my assistant when I was working at Cannell.
Wow.
Just by luck. I know, just by luck. Didn't figure that out for decades.
Did she like her car?
Fortunately, Kendall was fairly well off. She didn't need my car.
Okay. So when I do these interviews for the writers of the future, the whole purpose and the whole reason why it was originally created by Owen Hubbard was to provide a helping hand for the aspiring writer, and then 5 years later for the aspiring artist. And what you have to contribute here, I think, is important for people to get, and that's something that the contest itself is very much, I think, in tune with, because it's by the very nature, it's blind judging, so that all the judges ever see is a number associated with the work. So it is all about the quality of the work and the fact of science fiction and fantasy, alternate history, dark fantasy, and nothing else. It's not about personality. And so we've got all types of personalities connected with the contest, but everybody shares in common that they resonate with that whole concept of quality of storytelling, the ability to do even better storytelling. And I think that's one of the things you're communicating is I think is really important for people to, as a takeaway, to be able to understand.
Yeah. One thing I actually really liked about and still like about Writers of the Future, writers and illustrators of the future. I want to make sure I say that because people forget the illustrator side of it and how incredibly wonderful the work that they have done. Mm-hmm. If anybody goes out and buys one of the Writers of the Future, notice that the title says Writers and Illustrators of the Future, because when you go through it, you're going to see those illustrations and you link them to stories. They work together. But one of the things that I really liked about the writer's aspect of it is the fact that it is almost a double blind, the way you assess talent. I think it was Kevin I was talking to, and I made a comment. I made a joke. I said, I should write up a story and submit it, but problem is like a third of the judges know me. And Kevin corrected me. He says, we don't know who you are. He goes, and he goes through like a series, and he goes, you are judged strictly on your talent. And then I realized that scared me even more. So, I said, well, fortunately, I'm not going to submit right now. Thank you very much.
Yes. Well, it's interesting. When we first started the contest, it was, I think, 300 and some odd entries that first year, back in when it was announced in 83, and then we published the first book in 85. And now we get thousands of entries a quarter between both contests.
Wow.
So,
wow.
And I see now, because I get the Google alerts on Writers of the Future, and the number of people that have Writers of the Future in their resumes that I was a finalist, or that one newspaper, or that one Bleeding Cool article I forwarded to you. Do you know this?
Right.
This screenwriter, where he's
Jeffrey
listed
Thorne.
as one of his credits is the fact he was a finalist in Writers of the Future. Mm-hmm. We see that more and more because after 37 years, it is so gone beyond any shadow of a doubt as to what a person is if they win, or even now are a finalist, because it's strictly on merit. There is no incestuousness connected with this contest.
Yeah, no, and the bar is pretty high. That's another thing I learned the first time I read one of the collections. And I'll be honest with you, I read the collection with kind of an attitude. I kind of thought, well, let's see, there are so many things out there, so many contests out there that are really honestly just scams. And I said, I'm just going to take a look and see what it is that they're actually printing here. And I was I did not mean for this to be a commercial for Writers and Illustrators of the Future, although
it works for me.
It works for you. I was blown away. I really was. Some of the stories that I have read have been what you would normally think is very not formulaic, but they're laid out as you would expect them to, except the characters are so incredibly fun and mm-hmm. delightful. And I got to tell you, was it the last book or the one before? There was I wish I could remember the title of it. I've got to think of this. The story about the religious order that they were having a problem translating the words with the aliens they were trying to communicate with. Yeah,
that's in the volume 36, and that was the one that just came out. And that story was...
What's the title of that one? Please tell me, because I can't believe I forgot.
It was A Word That Means Everything by Andy Dibble.
Yes. And that one, I had to read the first 2 pages 3 times because the way that world was set up and the way, it goes right to the core of understanding, and the title has it. It's a word. It's like, how do you look at a word? What does it mean to you? And that was one that I just kind of, wow, okay, I'm very cerebral, but that one just blew my mind.
Yeah, we've had, there was one story one year by Scott, it was a few years ago, that every sentence had 5 words. And it was a real challenge to do that, but he did it. And so some people will go after and do things, but there's never like, okay, this is the theme of this book is blah. It's not. It's just, I mean, this current book you talked about there, you have that one, a word that means everything. And then in the last story, automated everyman migrant theater.
Yes. Another one. That was another good one. Yes, that's
it's
right.
Just a total different, like, wow, how do they get those ideas? It's just, I'm always amazed because I've been doing this for quite some time, and the stories get better and better. And at this point now, we're in a condition where several of our judges are past winners or people that pro'd out, meaning they became a professional writer before they won the story contest, but like Rob Sawyer from Canada. I mean, he entered several times. Dean Wesley Smith, well, he was the first person that walked across the stage to be awarded 37 years ago, and he's written hundreds of books. And then we have, like right now, Todd McCaffrey is one of our judges, but his mom, Ann McCaffrey, was a judge as of the second year.
Todd.
Yeah, and we've also got now Brian Herbert, his dad, Frank Herbert, the author of Dune. He was a judge until he passed away. Yeah. So we've got a lot of Orson Scott Card, who's Ender's Game. But the main thing
to clarify, just Brian has not passed away. When you say, okay, you were saying Frank Herbert, Brian Herbert and Frank Herbert's father, then you said he passed away. I just want to clarify to everybody, Brian has not passed away.
Right, exactly. Sorry. Okay. Thank you. Yes. But several of our current judges now were winners, like Eric Flint, who's a multiple New York Times bestseller with the 1632 series. David Farland, who's written a lot of several New York Times bestsellers. Yeah, Sean Williams was a winner. He's like one of the biggest selling science fiction writers in Australia. And then we have still our original, one of our original founding judges, Bob Silverberg. He was from the very beginning, as was Gregory Benford. He's been a judge also since the beginning. But anyway, there's a lot of people, and it's just the integrity of the contest has never been in doubt, and it was one of the things that was originally set up for that purpose. And so, again, with what you're talking about on your desire to really just the story to learn, and all these judges here are very much in tune with that same thing of like they want to work with all the winners. And every year we bring out the 12 writer winners and 12 artist winners. And they are given a week-long workshop on just let them just soak it in and become great friends. And they're treated as peers, as equals. And that's something I think is really, really important. And like your basic attitude is also really, really consummate with, I don't even know if that's the right word, but anyway, it really much aligns with that.
Well, I mean, for me, one of the things that there are so many walls up in the creative industries because nobody really can define how it works. Not just authors, but also in television, film, any of the creative areas. Art is subjective, as they say, and in television and screenwriting, writing is really more of a craft that can be artistic. When you're talking about novels and you're talking about illustrations, obviously, the actual creator is closer to the audience. And what I find with a lot of people is that they're being pummeled by the numbers game. There's so many people out there who are creative or aren't and don't know that they're not creative. And I want to put a caveat there. I think everybody has a creative spirit. It's how they're able to get that across to others. And in my business, you've got hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people trying to get in, and they're trying to storm the castle walls, and we don't know which ones are actually the ones we can work with or not. So what I benefited from when I broke in was that Bert and I happened to encounter the right people who, now we had the right attitude, as I said, but we encountered the people who said, let's get rid of all those walls. Let's just talk like let's get inside of that creative bouncy room of ideas and jump around and play. Writers of the Future and Illustrators of the Future, it does a very similar thing. It at least allows access to a protected environment where people can actually create their own networks. They're not having to worry so much about the competition against each other. They're able to focus much more on the fun and passion of what they're doing. So yeah, there's a lot of mirrors in not just my story, but other stories I know of people who have managed to break into the industry. Any creative industry.
That's a good point. And the other thing too, I think is really important, which by having people entering this contest over and over again, persistence. There's a definite value to being able to want to persist. The person that writes his novel and it doesn't sell, like, okay, I tried that and it didn't work, so I'm going to move on now. It requires, like Brandon Sanderson had written, I think, at least six novels before he sold his first one, and even then he was ready to give up. From when he told me, he's not one of our judges, but he's ready to give up. When he received a certificate from Writers of the Future as an honorable mention, realizing, okay, it's not hopeless, and I'm going to keep on persisting, and he did.
Well, yeah, that's that. Every success story you hear about, every time you see an interview with somebody who is successful, they will usually get asked, what is the one piece of advice you give to the aspiring person? What is the one word or what is the one suggestion? You will always, always hear some variation of the word perseverance. Stay with it. You have to stay with it. If you believe me, there are easier ways to make money, a lot easier ways to make money. But if you had that perseverance, the attitude I used to have was, you're the one that declares when you failed. You're the one who says, okay, today's the day I failed. If you keep going at it, and let's say that you never end up being the huge financial success, you never get the awards, whatever, you love what you're doing, and you keep doing it, and then one day you die. Guess what? You succeeded, because you never failed. You never said to yourself, I'm giving up on my dreams.
That's amazingly good point. And people, this is where the ego kicks in, and they're unwilling to just say, I'm going to keep on working. Last year we had a winner that entered 47 times before winning. Another person had been entering since volume 2 or 3, quit because he just totally gave up, and then he found out that he was the story in somebody's discussion about the writer that almost made it but quit, and he realized it was him. Then he got back into it again, and he won after 27 years of entering the contest. But he won it. Wow. He's now he's building up now his books that he's writing, and so it's an absolutely good point. Now, the subject of, because you've read some of the different stories that were written by L. Ron Hubbard from the 30s and 40s, and we've talked about this before in other talks. What about Mr. Hubbard? Would you say that for you is a point of interest or of admiration that you've got for his writing, because he's obviously the one that created this contest, and I've argued many times in favor of why he was one of the ones most suited to be able to have created this contest and provide this based on his own history. But any of your comments from yourself on this? Well,
people have to understand that there are a lot of authors that I still living today that I know, whom when I meet them, we have a nice chat, and then maybe a minute into the chat, I go, oh my God, I grew up reading your stuff. Oh my gosh. It's like we're having, having breakfast, and I'm watching you, balance a fork of scrambled eggs while you're munching on toast. And I realize, holy crap, I remember, sneaking off to the library and grabbing your books. So L. Ron Hubbard was one of those people that I had read his early pulp stuff before I even knew about him. So, you're a kid, you're just reading the stories. When I teach classes on writing, or when I'm a guest lecturer, or when I'm working with somebody, I rarely ever do a mentor thing, but when I do it, there's a word that they hear most frequently from me. I should say there are two words that they hear. The first word they might hear from me is when I say the word fine, as in, oh, that's fine. And what they learn is that is not the word you want to hear from me. Because when I say it's fine, it means that is adequate. That is okay. It functionally worked. What you want to do is you want to have me react to it with my second word. That's dynamic. I use the word a lot, dynamic writing. And dynamic writing means writing that is compelling, it's energetic, it has its own momentum, and more importantly, dynamic writing isn't just the high points of a plot or the cute phrases from the character. Every bit of your writing has to be dynamic. I described it to somebody recently. I said, when you chart out your story, what I do and what a lot of people do is they will first write down the peaks of their story. He discovers this is his father here. He finds about his dead mother here. He so on and so on and so on. And I said, what a lot of writers do is that they look at those peaks and they say, there's my important writing. And then the connective tissue between just has to get from one point to the other. And my response is, no, the connective tissue has to be just as dynamic as the peaks, because it's that path that your reader is following. Now, to take that to L. Ron Hubbard, his early pulp work, people really should study more about what the pulp market was back in the early days, in 30s, 40s, 50s. They had to crank out a lot of material. That's why it was called pulp. It was put on fairly bad paper and it's just cranked out. So we look back through the prism of history, and most of the pulp work that was done back then has disappeared because it wasn't really that good. It was formulaic. It hit certain points and it satisfied a certain bit of the needs for the reader at the time. But through the prism of history, we look back and those things that stood out are what we're talking about now. So one thing about Hubbard's writing, with the pulp writing and and later on, as I discovered with his larger books, his writing is incredibly dynamic. And I mean from the first page. The moment you get past the first page, or I shouldn't say get past it, the moment you start the first page, you are drawn forward. It's like you're leaning over your shoes trying to keep up with this, because I'm going to overstate it poetically, but dynamic writing is where you deliciously anticipate every word and sentence because you see it coming towards you and you can't wait till you experience it. In early pulp writing, the key for pulp writing was that you wanted to write something that when you got to the end of the chapter, when the reader got to the end of the chapter, I describe it this way. You're late at night, you've got a book, you're reading, and you're getting toward the end of the chapter that you're reading, and you already said to yourself, I got to go to bed. I got to go to sleep. So I'm just going to finish this chapter. Then you get to the last page of the chapter, and you go, okay, I'm just going to read 2 more pages of the next chapter because I got to figure out what just happened. And then suddenly you're repeating the process, and the sun comes up. So Hubbard's writing used to do that for me. When I was still an actor, and Bert and I were, again, just writing scripts for the fun of it, there was a time when I was waiting to move into a studio apartment, and I had to stay at Bert's place. He had a little studio as well. So I basically slept on a couch for about a month. And I don't know how he had the book, but somehow in that apartment was Battlefield Earth. I picked up the book and just thought I would read a couple of pages because it was late at night. Now, you know how thick that book is.
Right.
That is a tome.
Yes.
I devoured that book in 3 days. I just could not wait to get back and start reading that book again. It's still, I look back at that and say, only one other book has come close to that, and that was Benchley's Jaws. I mean, I just went right through that book. So then I started to realize, wait a minute, this is the same guy that I read. I even read some of the detective stuff that he had done. And I was actually surprised when you did one of the radio things with one of the cowboy premises. I didn't even know about the cowboy genre that he did.
Yeah.
But that was what really got me into it. And it's hard for me to read a tome. It is really hard for me to look at a book and say, that book is really thick. I'm going to pick it up and start reading it. Well, that's what got me started on that. So yeah, that's dynamic writing right there.
That's great. So that's in terms then of screenwriting or in writing in general. I mean, when you mentioned Kevin Anderson earlier, he said he got exhausted reading Battlefield Earth because he kept on turning the page and it was just like, it was a breakneck speed almost throughout the whole book. And he said it wore him out reading it because it was just so intense constantly.
Right. And also I'm a person who I'm very character oriented. My minor was psychology, sociology, not because I intended it to be. It was because I was taking classes for the fun of it. So I love the human mind. I love scenarios that challenge the basic core of humanity. Mm-hmm. And so same reaction that Kevin had. it's almost like you get pummeled. It's like every page is opening up something else. And I will tell you, though, one of my frustrations, though, about L. Ron Hubbard's writing, and this happened just recently with Typewriter in the Sky. You're reading through it, and he sets down a situation or a premise as totally normal within the context of the story, and you realize, holy crap, he could write an entire book about that alone.
Yeah.
And he doesn't. I mean, he has before, but there are sometimes you just read that and you say, oh my gosh, I got to see if he's because that's a great concept. Why didn't he go off with it? Well, he's just like, I'm just going to throw this on the page and move on. So, yep. There you go.
Yeah, he said he learned to write because of writing for the pulps. He said, okay, I need a 20,000 word story, or I need a 30. He could write, because he submitted, normally it was first draft, first time out, he'd send it there. And he could write to a story length. And so he said, he'd be told by Campbell, okay, I need this, or whoever, whatever he was whether he was writing mystery or adventure or Western or science fiction, fantasy, even romance. He did all those genres under, I think, 15 different pen names. And he said he could just write to a story length. And it was just amazing. And it was just...
I can't do that.
Yeah, A.E. Van Vogt told a story watching him write once, and this is one of the stories where he had he would just put the paper in the typewriter, and he'd look towards the wall, and he'd start typing. And his creative speed was 92 words a minute, and he'd just be creating the story. And it was just obviously he's a very fast typist, and he'd see the story play out in front of him against the wall, and he'd be typing the story as it was playing out. And when we released these stories from the Golden Age books back in 2008, 9, and 10, when we were doing the proofreading for it, we went back to his original typed manuscripts. And this is before there was such a thing as, computers where you could then go back and redo it. He would take where a story went off, and then he'd go back a page and start again and just type through his mistake or type through where it was going the wrong way. Because we'd all of a sudden be proofreading. All of a sudden, what happened? We're just doing it again. And he'd go back to a page earlier in the manuscript and just start from there, and then the story would go off in the direction. It was just, and he would and that's what he would submit. It was amazing.
Well, I'll tell you, that's a good lesson for all people out there who are writers. Everybody has their own style. Mm-hmm. And it is interesting. In Typewriter in the Sky, I think I saw a peek into what his own style, because he was kind of mocking himself as a writer while writing about it. But it's interesting. I overwrite almost everything, and then I love going back into the editing process. People are surprised when I tell them that one of my 60-page scripts probably required 700 pages for me to write. One of the things that I do when I'm writing a screenplay, especially, in television you have established characters, but in a screenplay, everything's got to come out of your head. And I've mentioned this to some new writers who will go, oh my God, is it that difficult? And the truth is this is not the difficult thing. But I said, I'll write 20 to 40 pages of my screenplay. Then I throw it all out and start over again. Because my process is I have to allow the environment and, more importantly, the characters to come to life. So I got to spend some time with them. Mm-hmm. So I'm not so much worried about a dedication to my actual plot. I have my vague idea of the plot, but I start allowing all the characters to start to live. And once they are alive in my head, once those voices are in my head and everything is starting to make sense, I go, okay, all right, let's get to work. And then I will start over. Now, I'll use bits and pieces as I need them, but I always end up overwriting because I believe very much that for me, when I overwrite, I have to cut back, and by cutting back, I'm forced to layer what I have previously written. Here's a bit of homework for all writers out there, and I'm even going to tell you the whole point of the homework. And I can guarantee you that after I tell you the point of the homework, you're going to say, "Okay, I don't need to do that. I understand it." Believe me, you have to do it because you don't understand it. I'm sorry if you say you understand it. No, you don't. So this is the homework. All writers out there, I want you to come up with a scenario. And I'm going to use screenplay terms, but this applies also for prose writing. You are going to have 5 characters, and they are going to be in a certain situation, and you're going to write 10 pages. And you're going to, dedicate yourself to this. Make this is a classroom learning experience. In those 10 pages, those 5 characters all have to have definitive backgrounds and characteristics. They all have to have individual personalities. They all have to have a reason to interact. They all have to be balanced perfectly within these 10 pages. There has to be some sort of a plot, a beginning, middle, and end. Now, they could all be stuck in an elevator. They could be on a bus, whatever. Now, I'm going to have my class, my fictitious class. You're going to write these 10 pages, and then you're going to rewrite them, and then you are going to rewrite them. And I don't want you turning them into me until they are perfect. And here's the key. Since there is no real teacher here, you cannot slack off. Don't become a lazy writer. You have to be the hardest critic of your own work. So write those 10 pages with those 5 characters in that story until it is as perfect as possible. It's ready to go. That's actually not the homework. The homework is this. Now cut 5 pages out of it and don't lose anything. That will show you how to layer your characters, how sometimes the lack of words mean more than words. That will show you how to imply things. That will show you how to play with the psychology of your reader, because it forces you to do it. Now, by telling you that was the whole point of it, a lot of people would say, oh, I get it. But believe me, if you actually do that, when you're done, when you have those 5 pages in front of you, you will go, holy crap, I just became a much better writer.
Well, that's great. And I'm going to invite everybody listening to this to go ahead and to send these to me, and then I will go ahead and forward them to your instructor.
Whoever that is. Did I mention my name? Did you mention my name? Nobody mentioned my name.
But anyway, if you do this drill and send it in to me, then I will forward them to Steve.
Okay. This is like the Soupy Sales thing where he told all the kids to, go to your parents' bed table, pull out those green pieces of paper and send them to me. And then they did. But no, seriously, it's one of the things I rail against is lazy writing. And lazy writing is when the writing serves the writer, but not the reader or the story. And when you are forced to cut things back, you're forced to dedicate yourself to the difficult writing. And that's what makes writing really good. Now, the comparison about the way L. Ron Hubbard wrote. One of my favorite writers and people I've worked with, the way she writes is she plays chess. She stares at a screen. And I can tell what she's doing is she's doing whatever the next beat is, the next dialogue, she's tracking the entire thing out in her mind like a chess game. And if it doesn't go where she wants, she puts all the pieces back and she does it again. And she will stare at a screen and then will type and then continue staring at the screen because she plays that game and it works. She's a wonderful writer. She and I have written together a few times, Babs Grahowski. We've written together a few times. And our styles on the page very much match. I am completely the opposite in that regard. I'm out playing in the yard. I'm talking to the assistants. I'm literally at sometimes, playing bowling in the hallways. I'm doing everything else. But in the back of my mind is still working on this. And then suddenly I will turn to somebody and I will just say, okay, I got to go. And I sit down, put my hands on that keyboard, and boom, I'm into the zone, and brrr, it just all comes out.
Right.
2 completely different processes. And yet she and I write well enough to work together, which anybody who's written with a partner knows how difficult that is. So the point being is that everybody has their own specific style, and I can tell you how to write. And then you can have somebody on here at your next podcast who will say 180 degrees of the opposite. We're both correct because those are our styles.
That's right.
Finding your own style is the key to it. That's the thing. And not being afraid of it. I'll bet you at a certain point in Hubbard's life and other people like that, other people who do the staring off and then boom, he sees the whole movie in front of his face and just types it out. There was probably a point in his life where he said, I'm not sure whether anybody else will like this. Should I bother doing it? And then there was that little voice that probably slapped him, the way that little voice slapped me when I said only special people do this, and said, well, I'm going to do it anyway.
Right.
And boom, there it is.
That's one thing that's really good also when we have the winners come out with all of our judges, because every judge has their own way and they all know that. And so when they teach the winners, like you've got Tim Powers that will very methodically go through on 3x5 cards, making notes and laying them out on his living room floor. And Kevin Anderson, who hikes up all the different mountains around the United States, around Colorado, and dictates his stories.
I know.
It's just amazing the difference. What happens. And Larry Niven, he's his own style. And some people talk about how to write hard sci-fi, how to write, all these different things, and everybody's got their own different style. So the takeaway that the winners get is that, okay, use what works for you. You got to develop your own style. And some of our judges said, throw away your first million words, which is what, when Hubbard started, he used to, he was in La Jolla, California when he first started. He would, he said, okay, he needed to, this is during the Depression stuff, he needed to make a living and he wanted to write because he was also doing a bunch of research. And so he traveled a lot. He was writing, doing his 50,000 words a month, but he was sometimes 100,000, but he would read the pulp magazines, find out what was selling, what was about it, and then he'd write stories and submit, and he just kept on doing it until he started selling. He did it several weeks, and then he started selling, so he could get like, okay, what worked and what didn't work, and then he started with this adventure fiction, then he moved. Mm-hmm. That was it, because the last stuff he wrote was science fiction and fantasy. That was the last genre when Street and Smith pulled him in to meet John W. Campbell to do it. So yeah. I think that's an important thing that people realize too, is you don't have this, I think everybody agrees on the persistence. That's like, right. You've got to do that. You can't give up. You can't quit. You got to keep on going on it. And just, if, there's no such thing as fail as only failing to continue.
Right.
So that's something that I think is pretty much universal from all of the different judges. But what you said there, it's like, it's the product and what's your method and what somebody else's method is what really counts on this stuff.
Yeah, and also a lot of these people you mentioned, mm-hmm. Many times readers will look at authors as being almost godlike because they are basically acting as gods in these worlds they create. They are people. They are human beings. Just
in a bathrobe.
Yeah. And funny, the story I told you earlier about sitting there across from somebody who was like, eating scrambled eggs, and suddenly it just hit me, oh my God, I grew up on your stuff. That was Larry Niven.
Okay.
I had met him at the science fiction, one of the clubs out here, and afterwards we all went out to have breakfast, and we sat there, and he just started talking about some of the things with Ringworld, and he's eating his breakfast and everything, and we're chatting, and then just suddenly part of me goes, "You are actually talking to Larry Niven." Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's funny when we have each year when we fly out the winners, and we have a dinner, we call it our barbecue, where the winners meet the judges, and the winners are like, they're just so like geeked out, like, oh my God, it's Larry Niven, or that was before with Jerry Purnell, or some of these different, mm-hmm. judges that we've had, Anne McCaffrey. And said, would you like to meet him? I said, yeah, because they want to see you, So then we introduced them, and they found out they talked to me. They were like, they treated me as an equal. They're just like,
right.
It's amazing.
Yeah, one of the things that I've done whenever I've made a convention apperances, especially for Xena, because Xena was such a popular show, I'm not somebody who stays behind the stage. That's just not me.
Right.
I like to get out. I mean, I was a geek at a time. I'm still a bit of a geek here. So, the nerd culture, the geek culture, you as my people. So I am known for just hanging out. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting is that at all the different conventions, whenever we had a new Xena convention, there would always be a group of people who it was their first convention. And I could tell who they were because as I walked down the hallway, they would turn to each other in whispers and they would point. That's Mr. Sears. I think that's Stephen Sears. I think that's Stephen L. Sears over there. He's the one who wrote that. They'll do like that. And what I do when I hear that is I immediately walk over to them and I will say, okay, we either hug it out or we just talk. What do you want to do? And we end up in a conversation so that the next convention, when I walk down the hallway, the reaction I get from them is, hey, Steve, which is what I prefer.
Right.
And I call them the old timers who have gone to all those conventions. They know me. They're all friends of mine. It literally is, hey, Steve, because, I'm just me. Larry Niven is just Larry Niven. Incredibly talented. But you know what? I've had breakfast with him. He's a cool person, but he has breakfast. Kevin J. Anderson. I can tell you stories about Kevin J. Anderson, which I think the statute of limitations are over. I probably could.
Yeah.
But no, Kevin and I are friends. And, when we hang out and we geek over our own things, when we hang out at Comic-Con and stuff like that, people who walk up, they realize, we started from somewhere. We started from where they were. We had a passion, they have a passion. We had a perseverance, hopefully they have a perseverance. But we're not the godlike figures. However, we are merchandising figures, so by all means, buy our product.
Exactly. So, I know you mostly because of your TV series that you wrote for. Do you have any stories or short fiction or any other books that... if anybody wants to be able to look you up to read something that you've written, do you have anything that?
I've got things that are coming out. It's interesting that I've been doing television and film. It's development work. The vast majority of what happens in the screenwriting and television world are things that people never see. The vast majority of the money that moves around are in development deals. So I've been fortunate that I haven't produced a show on the air for 15 years, something like that. But my work since then has been all in development, mostly paid, thank you very much, studios, but also my own personal development. I started moving into writing prose. Again, for the fun of it. Why not give it a shot? It'll be kind of cool. So at the moment, the only book I have published right now is my book about working as a television writer, which is called The Non-User-Friendly Guide for Aspiring TV Writers. It's on Amazon. I wrote it. It's mostly anecdotes. It is not to teach anybody how to write. It's to basically tell you, kind of how to survive in this business. But I started writing novels based on original concepts plus on some old screenplays, as every screenwriter will do. I've got like 3 of those in the works right now. But I also started writing short stories for anthologies. I have one that is 2 stories coming out in a new anthology called Jeff Sturgeon's Cities of the Future. And it's basically all set in a post-apocalyptic time when cities literally float. The earth is completely dry and destroyed and they float, and it's the interactions, the trade, the wars, all this kind of stuff. And the writers involved with that, I don't even know how I got included. Seriously don't. Kevin is one of the writers, for example. Jody Lanai is also one of the writers on that. So that anthology will be coming out fairly soon. I've had at least one story written in the Book of the Month Club anthology, Woe and Wonder, and I've got invitations to write some short stories for at least 3 upcoming anthologies, which I can't talk about right now because I don't like to talk about things until I have contracts.
Right.
But at the same time, the novels that I'm writing are being slightly derailed because of the film and television stuff that I've got going. The graphic novel that Kevin J. Anderson and I wrote together called Stalag X, we have that as a shopping arrangement with actually one of my favorite directors who is taking it around. I'm always kind of reluctant because it's a shopping deal to say who it is, but he is without using direct names, he is of the level of somebody who would direct in the Marvel universe or the DC universe or any of, and he loves to work with authors. So we have that deal going on. Plus I have another couple of option deals that are in various stages of progress. Now, whether they end up being filmed or produced, again, that's the next level.
Right.
But I'm trying to get more material out there of my own. And as a final word on this, the short stories I have been writing, I haven't decided exactly what I'm going to do. I've got 2 stories shy of a collection. When I have those 2 stories finished, I'm either going to self-publish it for the fun of it. I just kind of want to see what that experience is like. I'm, as Kevin said when he and I wrote together the first time, he said, "Get ready for those pennies to come rolling in." So it's not about the money. Or I may push this with some of the publishers I've made connections with. My deficit is that I'm not an established author, so collections are usually collections from established authors, but I do, admittedly, I have a fairly interesting resume in another medium.
For sure.
So, so we'll see. But I'm moving much more into the prose area. I'm really, really digging it.
Well, that's great. That's really good. And I really appreciate you taking this time here to talk today, because I think a lot of people, the whole idea of writing isn't just writing a short story or writing a novel. A writer writes. And
absolutely.
I haven't really addressed this area of screenwriting. And so I'm so thankful that I've had this, that finally it sunk through my skull that, oh my gosh, Stephen Sears,
well, most of what hopefully your listenership will also take from this is that I am a screenwriter primarily, television writer specifically. Mm-hmm. However, they should notice that most of what we talked about was not about the specifics of screenwriting, television writing as far as story is concerned. It was about story. It was about characters. It was examples of people who have made their storytelling work. Because the truth is, you're only talking about different formats and businesses. And you do need to understand those. Mm-hmm. But there's a reason why a novel is written in a certain format. There's a reason why a screenplay is written in a certain format. But if you don't have the core of what we've been talking about, the way that, again, a Larry Niven, a Kevin J. Anderson, Todd McCaffrey, L. Ron Hubbard, the way we all approach this, there's a commonality in there. It's about story. It's about character. It's about creating worlds that never existed with characters who have never been born and putting them into environments and situations that you can only dream of. And we allow you to experience it.
Well, that's very well stated there. So that's good. And that's absolutely correct. So again, thank you very much, Stephen. And thank you for listening. Subscribe to the Writers of the Future podcast wherever you get your podcasts. The Writers of the Future podcast is available on the United Public Radio Network, as well as SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, Pocket Cast, Stitcher, Player FM, iHeart, and Spotify. Writers and Illustrators of the Future are contests created by L. Ron Hubbard to provide a means for the aspiring writer and artist to be seen and acknowledged. It is free to enter and open to new and amateur short story writers and artists of science fiction or fantasy. Again, thank you very much, Stephen.
Absolutely. Thank you.